Welcome. Today we're going to talk about an exciting one because this is one of my favorites that I've seen in 1970 and one of the best ones I've seen in months really for 1970. We've had a lot that have been kind of not super exciting, but this one's real good. This is called Count Yorga Vampire, which actually the title screen that shows up says that it's called The Loves of Count Yorga Vampire, which was its original title back when it was intended to be a softcore vampire porn. But they couldn't secure money for that, and the producer, producer Michael McCready, said that he would put up the money only if they turned it into a straight horror film. And that is a good point I want to make. This movie feels like a horror film from the beginning through to the end. A lot of the movies that were made in 1970 that I've talked about were horror, but like really they were kind of like thriller, or maybe they were sci-fi or fantasy or something where like in the last 20 minutes people start getting killed. This one, you can hear that music there in the background, which sadly I don't have full music for this, but it's got that atmosphere of it being scary the whole time. So I like this one a lot. So let's talk about who directed it. This is Bob Kelljan's first movie. He wrote and directed it. He did intend for it to be a porn at first, but he did a really good job. The story is fun. I mean, fun if you like horror. It's not funny. It's not upbeat at all, but it's fun to watch, and the directing is mostly good. He went on to make 2 other vampire movies. He made a sequel to this one, The Return of Count Yorga. And then after that, he did the sequel to Blackula. So he did Blackula Lives Again, or whatever it's called. So he did 3 vampire movies. He also did a movie called, I believe it's called Rape Squad, which is more of an exploitation flick. And he only did 5 movies total. So he's not a big horror name. This was not a giant production. It was produced by Iorga Films, and it's the only movie ever to be produced by Iorga Films. So it's a totally independent movie. It was distributed by AIP, American Independent Pictures. And AIP has done some of the other movies we've talked about. AIP did the Dunwich Horror, which was okay, but mostly disappointing. And AIP often distributed the Hammer films in the United States. So to me, AIP is kind of like, in a way, it's the American equivalent of Hammer. And Hammer, of course, does a lot of vampire movies, but they're doing mostly period pieces. And this one is not a period piece. It's a contemporary piece taking place in 1970 with young characters. If we compare this to other vampire films in 1970, which there are at least 4 or 5 that we've done here already, and many more to go, what do we have? We had the Hammer film, The Vampire Lovers, which is based off a novel that's written in the early 1800s called Carmilla, and the whole thing is a period piece. And it was okay, but to me, it's not that exciting to watch people of 1970 pretend on a relatively low budget that it is 1830 or whatever. So there was Vampire Lovers. We also had the horrible Andy Milligan movie that he did about vampires, which was just god-awful. So that wasn't too great. We had The Vampire Doll, which was very good. That was the Japanese vampire story. And that was very good, although it was a bit slow. And we also had Scream and Scream Again, which doesn't really have a convention. It doesn't really have a traditional vampire in it, but it does have man-made creations that survive off drinking human blood. But they didn't have fangs, and they weren't formally people like we have in all these other vampire stories, people that got turned. So overall, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. It was a borderline 9 out of 10. There were a couple of things that held it back from being a 9 out of 10, but it was really good. I rented it for $4, and it was worth the $4. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? Oh, it features Robert Quarry as Count Yorga, the vampire. He does a really good job. He's creepy, and he looks like Dracula, really. He was in a few other movies. He was in, what was he in? He was in mostly movies that came later. This was one of his earlier films. As far as movies that we've talked about, the only one that really was in a movie that we talked about was Donna Anders. She was a very minor role in Dream No Evil. She was not one of the main characters, but she played a minor role in Dream No Evil. I think, one of these characters went on to the sequel, one of them that survived. And I think Roger Perry was in The Man with Two Heads or something like that. So none of these actors are big. It's mostly unknown, definitely unknown actors for the time. And it's a really good great independent piece of film. So 8 out of 10. And now going forward, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the plot points that I liked. I'm not going to... there's no mystery in this movie. So that's one interesting thing about it. There's not really anything to spoil. I mean, you kind of just have to see it and enjoy it. Because, first of all, it's called Count Yorga Vampire. So it's not like we're wondering who the vampire is here. Okay, Count Yorga shows up in the beginning of the movie. He's conducting a seance at the request of one of our main characters. We have a whole bunch of young 20s main characters, and the mother of one of them has passed away in the past month. And Count Yorga was the mother's brand new boyfriend. So we already know as the audience that he's a vampire. Of course, no one else knows he's a vampire yet. So he's conducting a seance, and they do get in contact with this woman's mother, okay? And it's a traumatizing experience for the woman, and so they end the seance quickly, and Count Yorga needs to go home but needs a ride home because he doesn't have a car. So this is suspicious number one, is that he was dating this woman for 3 weeks and then she died. And suspicion number two is that he has no car. He goes home, and when two of our main characters drive him home from the seance party, his servant opens up a gate, and his servant looks kind of like... Actually, you know what he looks like? If you've seen The Old Dark House, Boris Karloff plays a butler who is a very monstrous-looking butler for a creepy family in The Old Dark House, and this guy looks just like Boris Karloff's character there. He's basically a creepy, monstrous butler. He's only got one eyebrow, scarred face, messed up teeth, and barely can talk, has a speech impediment. He also controls a virtually ravenous dog that Count Yorga can calm down through supernatural capabilities. There's actually so many cool parts to this movie that I'm not even going to bother going through them all because it'll just make the video too long. But I'm going to talk about a couple of my favorite parts, and then I'll let you judge the rest for yourself. There's one part where after they try and bring him home, their van gets stuck in the mud, and they notice that it's only muddy in the exact spot that their van is stuck in. So again, we've got this horror feel, this supernatural horror feel, like that can't really happen. And I prefer movies where this stuff just can't really happen, so I can just accept everything as it comes. There's realistic thrillers where those always have me thinking like, well, could that really happen? Would that really happen? But here we have vampire attacks, so I don't have to worry about like, would that really happen? I can just enjoy it for what it is. So Count Yorga has made one patch of ground muddy, and so they're stuck. They have to spend the night, and as they're sleeping, they hear the animals outside get progressively louder and louder and louder. And, I'm a little desensitized now, but I'm sure that would have been scary to people seeing the movie at the time. And actually, that part got so much louder than any other part of the movie that I had to turn the volume down. because you've got crickets and frogs and birds and wolves like screeching, and it's to the point where you can't even listen to it anymore, and it was so effective. And the girl in the van has curtains because it's like this 1970 hippie van, and the girl opens up the curtains to see what is causing all this noise, and Count Yorga is staring right in, so it was a little bit shocking. That was really good. And then he attacks them, bites her in the neck, and of course she turns gradually into a vampire, and then the rest of these kids are dealing with it. They don't really believe in vampires. That's another thing. In a lot of these movies like The Vampire Lovers and Dracula and stuff like that, the superstition that vampires exist is there in the characters. The characters already believe in vampires. In this movie, it's regular people, and the vampire is a work of fiction in their minds. And I like it so much more because it almost makes it realistic as opposed to a total fantasy world. So they bring the girl to a doctor before she's fully turned, and the doctor looks at her. She's got 2 puncture wounds in her neck. They're trying to figure it out, and he runs blood tests. They give her a transfusion. He runs a blood work, and it's really strange looking blood. And so he comes up with this theory that maybe she's been bitten by a vampire, and of course no one believes him. He calls the police. The police are offended that he would even say this. None of the friends believe him, so he's just got to try and prove that Count Yorga is a vampire, and we as the audience know that he is. Also, Count Yorga's home in the basement is this awesome gothic setting where he's got all these coffins and he's got all these candles, but upstairs it looks like a regular house. So he goes down and sits on this throne, and he's like lining up all these women that are his vampire brides. And you can see him there in this pretty cool poster. Okay, so he's got all these vampire brides. They do his bidding, Dracula style. They attack people throughout the movie. And probably the craziest part of this movie is that when the girl Iorga is just starting to turn, the doctor tells her go home and eat a bunch of steaks, like really rare steaks, because she's becoming anemic. She lost a lot of blood. And then we find out that the original girl's mother died of anemia, like quickly onset anemia, obviously because she was becoming a vampire. And they go to see if she's okay. They walk into her house and she's eating a cat, a live cat. She's taking bites out of the cat, and the cat's bleeding everywhere. And in reality, I read what they used. Like, I don't know if they used bloody hamburger or something like that. Or like, I forget what they used on the cat now. But it was shocking. Like it was, I would say it was as shocking as scenes from I Drink Your Blood, which you know by now if you watch these, that was really one of my favorites of the year. So I was pretty excited to see something that extreme in the first 25 minutes of the movie. Or first half hour of the movie. This is after we already had a full vampire attack, a seance, gothic settings, creepy music. The whole thing is super effective. Unfortunately, this movie originally, when brought to the MPAA, was told that it would be getting an R, if not an X, and they wanted to get it a GP rating, which basically the same thing as PG. So they cut out the craziest parts, and I did not have access to these scenes because I just watched this online. I know there's an Arrow release. I wonder if they have the R and X rated scenes on the Arrow release. I would be interested in seeing that. All right, this video is getting long, but one more thing. When they do kill Count Yorga at the end, they stake him in the heart, and he turns into like ash or sand or something, and that looked pretty cool. Now, why am I not giving this a 10 out of 10 after I'm ranting and raving about it? All right, there's a few things. One, the special effects, for the most part, are not great, even for the time. It's obviously a cheaply made movie, and we're lucky that all the actors, most of the actors are so good. Also, it's not like all the special effects are bad. There's a really good part there. The whole basement of Count Yorga's place is really good. But as far as like the vampires go, it looks like they kind of put like powder on their faces and like false teeth. And in some cases of some of the vampire brides, the false teeth don't even really fit in their mouths for one or two of them. So, you know, it doesn't really lose a lot of points for me. But then also, we have a few of the very small roles. There are a couple of people that show up in one scene only, or possibly two scenes, and their acting is not on par with the rest of the main characters. And it's so bad it briefly took me out of the movie. I was shocked that it was even allowed to stay in. Like, I don't know. The director did such a good job directing everyone, and then there was a couple of little extras there that had one or two lines each, and it just sounded horrible. And then the part that really made it an 8 and not a 9 was the fact that when Count Yorga dies, the death before he turns to ash is horrible. They stab him, they stake him in the heart, and he doesn't make a single noise for like 6 seconds or something like that. And then he goes from being silent to just screaming maniacally, and it just doesn't fit like his character, because he's such a cool character for the entire movie, and then all of a sudden he's screaming like a baby, you know? Like, I mean, okay, I'm not a vampire, I don't know what it would be like to get staked in the heart, but like, either start screaming as soon as you feel it, or like, maybe like go out with some grace. I don't know, it's just weird. So when that happened, I was teetering between 8 and 9 the whole time, and I'm going with an 8, but it's a strong 8. So this movie was really good. I would say it is in my top 5 or 6 of all 1970, and we're at like 32 movies here. I've only got about 15 left to do, and 5 of those 15 are vampire movies. So I've been saving a lot of these vampire movies for last, mostly because I got to pay for the rest of them that I'm going to talk about. And I was kind of holding out to see if any of them would become free, because each month we get different movies on different streaming sites. But the good thing is that most of these movies that I'm paying for are worth the money. I've seen a couple that I haven't made videos of yet, and you know, there's a reason why they're not up for free on one of the free sites. They're worth the money. So this was an exciting one. I highly recommend you watch the movie. I think even if you watch this whole thing, the movie's not spoiled. It is a good time for horror fans. I'm really glad that there is a sequel, and once I break into 1971, I'm going to be doing the sequels of the 1970 movies first, so we won't have to wait too long to see the return of Count Yorga. All right, see you next time.